For many years there have been numerous incidences where people have found themselves in strange places, other dimensions, and in a different time. These are 10 strange experiences into parallel universes. Number 10. The pilot who entered a parallel dimension. In 1935, a British pilot named Sir Victor Goddard flew his biplane from Scotland to England on a weekend leave. On the way he passed over Drem airfield near Edinburgh, which had been constructed during World War I. The tarmac and 4 hangars were in disrepair, and barbed wire divided the field into numerous pastures filled with grazing cattle. Returning home a day later, Goddard ran into a violent storm and lost control of his plane, and was fortunate to recover from a downward spiral. As Goddard climbed back up through the rain and fog, the sky suddenly filled with sunlight. Below him was the Drem airfield, only the farm had disappeared, and the hangars were no longer in a state of disrepair. At the end of the restored tarmac stood 4 bright yellow planes, one an unfamiliar monoplane. These were surrounded by mechanics in blue overalls. Notable to Goddard, since RAF mechanics only ever wore brown. Had Goddard travelled forward in time? Number 9. The Philadelphia Experiment. A seaman named Al Bielek claims that during World War II he was involved in a project that sent a ship into hyperspace and returned. When the ship returned, they found some crew members were molecularly fused to the ship's metal. Bielek claims that Nikola Tesla was involved in this experiment, and that 2 men who were sent 40 years forward in time subsequently returned to the said battleship. The project was called the Philadelphia Experiment. When they boarded the ship, they found 2 men buried in the steel deck, 2 men were buried upright in the steel bulkhead, a 5th man had his hand buried in the steel bulkhead. He lived, but was the only one of the 5 to survive, and they had to amputate his hand in order to release him. There was absolute chaos, and some of those still on deck were insane or totally out of it. Where had this ship gone? Number 8. The Man from Tured. In 1954, a neatly dressed middle-aged Caucasian man, whose primary language was French, yet he spoke Japanese and several other languages, arrived at a Japanese airport. When they asked him for his country of origin, he stated that he was from Tured, on the border between France and Spain. The official told him that Tured didn't exist, but he presented them with his passport, issued by this non-existent country. He said his country had existed for 1,000 years. He was then detained in a hotel for further questioning. The following morning, the authorities found he had completely vanished from his hotel, which had been guarded by immigration officials all night long, and all of his personal documents, including his passport and driver's license issued by the mystery country, vanished from the airport security room. Police and airport officials searched in vain for the mysterious man who had totally disappeared. Number 7. Carroll Chase McCauley. Carroll Chase McCauley drove to San Bernardino, California to spend a few days at a sheepdog trial in Perris, California. She came upon a road sign for nearby Riverside. Her family had lived in Riverside since the early 1800s, and she wanted to visit familiar places, such as her old house and the cemetery where her grandparents were buried. After attending the sheepdog trial, she then drove to Riverside. She could not find anything familiar. Her street wasn't the same, everything was wrong. Her house wasn't there, and none of the houses looked familiar. Everything looked different. So she then drove to the street where her grandmother once lived, but found that none of the houses were anything like she remembered, and the houses were all new. Her grandma's house was gone, and the cemetery appeared unkempt and overgrown. McCauley then visited her school, Riverside City College and Central Middle School. The college looked right, the middle school looked right, but markedly different. She then visited the main street, once home to restaurants, insurance companies, banks and motels, but was now a ghetto that was all graffitied up and deserted, but was too afraid to stop and ask questions. She realised something otherworldly was happening to her, and why did everything look so unfamiliar? After a couple of hours, confused and bewildered, McCauley drove home. A few years later, McCauley's father died, and she was to attend the cemetery that she saw as an empty, fenced-off, weedy lot, and she found it back to normal. The rest of the city was also back to normal, as well as her grandma's house. The main street had also returned to normal. Had Carroll Chase McCauley slid into a parallel dimension? Number 6. Lorena Garcia. In 2008, a 41-year-old well-educated professional woman named Lorena Garcia awoke and found small details that seemed peculiar. Her sheets and pyjamas were different from what she remembered wearing to bed. She then drove to work where she'd been employed for 20 years. However, upon arriving at her work, she realised everything was different, despite being in its usual location. She then returned home only to find the man from whom she says she had separated 6 months before had acted like the separation had never taken place. Her new partner, whom she claimed she had been seeing for 4 months, was nowhere to be found. She hired a private detective to help locate her partner's whereabouts, but he could find no trace of him at his alleged residence or any trace of his family. Lorena Garcia believes she woke up in a parallel universe and has not been able to return. Number 5. Pedro Oliver Ramirez. In 1986, Ramirez claims he was driving from Seville, Spain to the town of Alcalá de Guardera, which he had done on many occasions, when he allegedly went around a curve and found himself driving on an unfamiliar, straight, 6-lane highway. He was surrounded by foreign structures and bizarre terrain. He felt a sensation of heat while a chorus of voices sang out in the distance. One voice stood out among the others, telling him he had just teleported to another dimension. The cars around him appeared outdated. After about an hour of confused driving, Ramirez did a left-hand turn off of the highway and was astonished to find he was looking at his home in Alcalá de Guardera. When he retraced his steps, he could not locate the crossroads, the road sign, or the 6-lane highway again. Where had he travelled to? Number 4. Shadow people. Shadow people are said to be creatures of supernatural origin which appear as dark forms in the peripheries of a person's vision and disintegrate or move between walls when noticed. Reports of shadow people are similar to ghost sightings, but differ in that shadow people are not reported as having human features, wearing period clothing or attempting to communicate. Witnesses also report the feeling as being in the presence of something that was once human. Some individuals have described being menaced, chased or attacked by shadow people. There have also been reports of shadow people appearing in front of witnesses or lingering for several seconds before disappearing. Witnesses report that when encountering these shadow people, they have a feeling of dread. Most accounts of shadow people describe them as black humanoid silhouettes with no discernible mouth, nose or eyes, or any expression whatsoever, though purported witnesses have also described child-sized humanoids or shapeless masses. Some reports also include glowing red eyes, and the movement is also described as being very quick and disjointed. Number 3. Rudolph Fence. In June 1950, a man suddenly appeared in the centre of New York City's Times Square, as if from out of the blue. He was wearing old-fashioned clothes and sported the kind of mutton chop sideburns that had gone out of fashion decades ago. He had a look first of astonishment and then panic flashed across his face. In a panic, he raced forwards, but was unfortunately struck down and killed by a car. When police examined the man, they found 19th century money in his pocket as well as business cards identifying him as Rudolph Fence. They later contacted the widow of Rudolph Fence Jr. The widow told them that their father-in-law, Rudolph Fence Sr., had disappeared one day without a trace in 1876. Rudolph Fence appeared to have vanished in 1876, only to reappear in 1950. Number 2. Hutton and Brand. In 1932, German newspaper reporter J. Bernard Hutton and photographer Hutton Brand reportedly visited the Hamburg shipyard to do interviews for a story. As they were leaving, they heard the drone of aircraft engines. Looking up, they saw the sky filled with warplanes. Bombs began exploding around them, and within a short time the area was a raging inferno. Brandt snapped pictures of the devastation, and the two drove back into Hamburg. When the film was developed, there was no evidence of the attack. The pair's editor did not believe their story. Hutton later moved to London, where many years later saw a newspaper story in 1943 about an RAF raid on Hamburg called Operation Gomorrah, where approximately 500 to 600 bombs were dropped, killing 40,000 people. The accompanying photos showed the shipyard just as he and Brandt had seen 11 years earlier. It was World War II's first widespread destruction of a major city, and the last anyone heard Hutton or Brand. Number 1. Stutter Lansing. Since 1967, Stutter Lansing has taken numerous film footage depicting saucer-shaped UFOs and other unidentified objects, using a variety of cameras under many different conditions. On occasion, strange lights in the sky she photographs have been witnessed by friends and independent observers. Many of her pictures are quite unlike the lights that have been witnessed, and sometimes objects and faces appear on the film. Strange sounds and voices also appear on audio tapes and her presence. Some of her apparent psychic photographs show images of flying saucers. Mrs. Lansing claims to see strange images that show up on a film, and evidence suggests other dimensions to this phenomenon. What strange abilities does Stutter Lansing possess? Hey, make sure you subscribe to see our next Weird World video.